Hello, I'm here with Matt Siegfried, local historian, and he's going to tell us a little bit about the mural here that's on the side of Finesse 1.
Right.
Hey, Matt.
Hello. All right, so we'll just go quickly through who each of these images are represented. This is Helen McAndrew, and many people in Ypsilanti know who Helen McAndrew is. She's probably going to be the most famous person on this mural. Helen was originally born in Scotland, came here with her husband William McAndrew, who's a cabinet maker. Ended up on the East Coast in Maryland for a bit in the 1840s and got in real trouble for their anti-slavery activity. They were teaching African Americans in their home, and they had to move, and eventually they ended up in Ypsilanti. And Helen, when she was here, the family was really involved in abolitionist movement, the Liberty Party, Underground Railroad, all of that kind of stuff. And Helen decided that one of the things that was really necessary for this community was health care for women, African Americans, and working people. So she actually went to university or to medical school after she arrived here and got her medical degree. So she's one of the first women doctors in Michigan, certainly the first woman doctor in Washtenaw County. And she opened, on South Huron Street, she opened a home, a convalescence home, a spa, before hospitals that treated all these people. It was called the Rest for the Weary, and she was called Dr. Helen by everybody. So she was really important, and she continued her activism after slavery and all of that. In fact, when she died, I think around 1906, the eulogy from her son said that she marched in her old age with the same grim determination that she did in her young days against slavery. So she was a real activist here in Ypsilanti. Next to her is Allie DeHazen, and Allie grew up on South Adams Street. She is H.P. Jacobs' granddaughter. So she is the daughter of Al DeHazen and Anna Louise Jacobs. And she was one of the first black women to go to Michigan State Normal College, now Eastern Michigan University. She would graduate at 15 with a musical degree and become a leading classically trained musician, and one of the best trained black classical musicians of her age. She lived here for a number of years, and she stayed down in Adrian for a while. She ended up marrying another pioneering black doctor who graduated from the University of Michigan Medical School and became leaders of the black community in Washington, Pennsylvania. So she's the last of H.P. Jacobs' descendants to live. She lived into the 1950s. Next to her is Isa Stewart. Isa Stewart was born in bondage in Virginia way a long time ago, maybe around 1800. And she escaped to Ypsilanti or to Michigan in the 1830s. And she brought a couple of items with her, including a knife and a conch shell, both of which she used to defend herself. And these items were kept by her family over generations and generations. She, with her husband Judson Stewart, would be founding members of Brown Chapel AME and donate the land that Brown Chapel is currently on all the way back in the 1850s. Her daughter would become one of Elijah McCoy's first wife. So, and she has probably hundreds of descendants in Ypsilanti who probably don't know they're descendants of this remarkable woman. Okay, so here is Weltha Sherman, and you can see Weltha here with her wheelbarrow and bricks. Weltha was born, like so many African Americans of the 19th century, in a Canadian refuge community, exile community. After the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, even free African Americans go en masse up to Canada, and she's born way up north near St. George's Bay. And she comes to Ypsilanti after the Civil War, like so many African Americans, and she's going to live from 1852 into World War II. And during this period, she really is the matriarch of black Ypsilanti. So she's a teacher, she's a community organizer, she's really active in her church, and she was determined that black people in Ypsilanti would have a church built of brick rather than wood to show that they were going to be here forever, show their permanence. So she literally organizes to get the bricks and tools and building materials together to build Brown Chapel AME. It's built by the hands of the parishioners themselves. She goes to building sites around town and asks for donations and all of that kind of stuff to build the church. So she was really instrumental in that. And to her, it wasn't just a symbol of her faith, it was a symbol of this community. And she is honored all the way in World War II for her lifetime of service. She's honored down at Farragut Street School. So she saw a remarkable life from before slavery was overthrown to World War II in jet airplanes. Okay, so next to her,
those are both her. Hers
those
a young
are both
woman.
her young,
and hers,
young,
okay.
yeah, because she has such a long life
Got
here.
it.
She's so active in her youth all the way into her old age. During the 30s, she was organizing food and clothing drives during the Depression in her 80s. And this woman here would be Elijah McCoy's second wife, and her name was Mary Eleanor Delaney, and she is in many ways more important than Elijah McCoy. She was born literally on the Underground Railroad. Her parents were escaping in southern Indiana. She was born in the 1840s in a abolitionist stronghold called Lawrenceburg, Indiana. After the Civil War, she didn't have formal education as a child, but after the Civil War, she went to a school in St. Louis for newly freed African Americans. Somehow she gets to Ypsilanti. A lot of people come to Ypsilanti. We've talked before how important Ypsilanti is. She comes to Ypsilanti and marries Elijah in the 1870s, but will stay here for a number of years, over a decade, more than that, before they move to Detroit. And while she's here, she's really active in women's clubs and these social organizations and civic organizations. Remember, black women don't have the vote, they don't have access to political, they're really involved in these civic organizations. So Mary McCoy would become vice president of the National Association of Colored Women's Clubs, along with Booker T. Washington's wife. She would found in Detroit the Phyllis Wheatley Home for Aged Colored Women. She founded the Sojourner Truth Memorial Society that set up to give scholarships to the children of people born in bondage to go to University of Michigan. And then she set up a wonderful home called the Elijah McCoy Home for Colored Children. And what she realized was that black women in Detroit took care of a lot of people's children. And somebody needed to take care of their children while they were taking care of children. And so she set up a home, like a kindergarten, a nursery school, to take care of these children of black domestic workers. So many of the most important social and civic organizations in Michigan for black women were founded by her, and she would have developed those relationships right here in Ypsilanti. So when the National Association of Colored Women's Clubs has their convention that she would be vice president of in 1904, there would be dozens of Ypsilanti women who would go there. So the next is Carolyn King, and many people may know Carolyn. Carolyn will be the only person on this mural who's still alive. When she was 12 years old, I believe, in the early 70s, she decided in the midst of the women's movement and women doing all kinds of things and making all kinds of demands. She's just a little girl, but that's the world she's growing up in. So she demands to get on the Little League baseball team and Ypsilanti Orioles. But girls aren't allowed to play on the team, and she just wants to play baseball. The mayor of Ypsilanti at that time is George Goodman, our second African-American mayor, and the son of Thelma Goodman, a pioneering black woman in Ypsilanti, opened a clothing store, a salon down on Harriet Street. And George really stood up for Carolyn. George went to bat against Little League nationally and said that the local Little League, after some debate, and the city would support Carolyn. Eventually, this gets to court cases, and eventually Title IX is ruled, which means that schools have to, if they're going to provide sporting facilities for boys, they have to do it for girls. They have to allow girls to play on all of these sports. And that, in large part, is due to this little girl from Ypsilanti. She still throws out the first pitch in a lot of Ypsilanti Little Leagues. These two women right here are two sisters, and they're really wonderful. These are, maybe you can't say anything exceptional about them, except their lives are exceptional, and they're really representative of so many black women in Ypsilanti. There are Louisa and Almeda Artis. They're born two different places. So Louisa is 15 years older than her sister. Louisa is born in Indiana, and her sister is born in Canada. After the Fugitive Slave Act, Louisa's family flees to Canada. Louisa will marry a man named Charles Augustus right before the Civil War and move to Ypsilanti, along with a lot of her family, including her younger sister. Charles Augustus would join the 54th Massachusetts and was killed at the Battle of Fort Wagner, made famous in the movie Glory. So before she's 25 years old, she's a widow whose husband has died in the most iconic moment for African Americans in the Civil War. She would end up remarrying another Civil War veteran, a man named George Hayes, and there's tons of Hayeses still in Ypsilanti. Her sister would marry Robert Morton, and they would live kitty corner from each other for over 50 years down on South Adams Street. And they both worked at where Hawkins House Hotel is as cooks. And that's where the Blackstone bookstore is right now. They were cooks there. In fact, Louisa died making a cake or a pie at work. So they're working women, you know, they're struggling women. They come from a really kind of, well, they come from a background of enslavement and real deprivation. And women don't go to a lot of school back then. A lot of people don't go to school, but especially black women. So they're instrumental in the 1880s setting up women's study groups for the women of Southside Ypsilanti. So groups called like the Light Seekers will meet at Almeida's house, or the Ladies' Lyceum will meet at Louisa's house, and these would be gatherings of black women to study and discuss among themselves. And this is going on in the 1880s, 1890s. You can see where Mary McCoy would have learned all of that kind of stuff. So they have dozens and dozens of families still here. They are the half-sisters of James Kersey, who there's lots of Kerseys here. Then right here we have Anna Chalmers Alexander. Anna was a white woman who was born in New York, but her family, it was all daughters in the family, so her father moved to a farm in Pittsfield to be close to the normal college so his daughters could go to school. She became a teacher and a suffragette, a really leading activist for women's rights in the period right before women got the vote in 1919, 1920. Michigan, they got it a little bit earlier, at least for state elections. And she was the granddaughter of abolitionists, the daughter of a Civil War veteran, and she would devote her life entirely to the south side of Ypsilanti. She worked at the black school, she was a member of the black churches, she lived on Buffalo Street. She was immersed in that community, so much so that there was a report on black educators in Michigan, and she is given special mention back in those days. Right before the amendment on women's right to vote, she has a big speech where she demands women's right to vote and says the things that women will be concerned with: education for people, good wages, child labor, health care, all of that kind of stuff is why we want women to vote. Right after she gives that speech, she's actually killed tragically in a train accident where the train crosses Prospect, and would not live to see the amendment pass for women's rights just a few months after she died. And then the last woman is a woman who just recently died. She died in 2014, and her name is Maud Odom Forbes. And Maud's mother was the sister of Garther Roberson. Garther Roberson was part of a large group of people who came up from Alabama, the Roberson family, and were instrumental in Second Baptist Church. And Garther Roberson, her uncle, would have been the most important black preacher here for many decades during the crucial years of the 1930s and 1940s. Many Roberson children and grandchildren are still preachers around this area. So Maud was born in Alabama, but came up was born in Ypsilanti in 1936 to a family that had come in that Great Migration. And she would eventually she went to Ypsilanti School. She would go to Eastern Michigan University in the 1950s. She would get an education degree. She would then teach down at Perry Street, and then Adams Street and Fletcher School, or Adams School and Fletcher School. She was the first black woman principal in Ypsilanti, one of the first in the state of Michigan. All during the 70s, she was the principal at Fletcher, and then she ended her career in the 1990s as the principal of Adams Street, and so many students remember Mrs. Maud. So it's really wonderful to have these women who are just the tip of the iceberg of the remarkable women who make up some of Ypsilanti's history.
Thank you so much,
Right.
Matt. This is awesome.
Great. Thank you so much, Mark.
I'll see you tomorrow at the
The
unveiling.
opening 6 o'clock here, 500 Congress. Hope to see everybody here. Thanks a lot.